Cedar Falls wasn't the kind of place you found on a map unless you were looking for it. Tucked deep in the forested hills of Western Oregon, the town was a quiet, blink-and-you-miss-it kind of place. It had one gas station, two churches, a diner that hadn't changed its menu since 1968, and a single traffic light that mostly just blinked yellow. The kind of place where the mountains kept secrets and the people kept their distance, until gossip gave them something to cling to. The Collins family had always been part of the town's fabric. Daniel Collins, once a big city physician, had returned to Cedar Falls after his wife's sudden passing during childbirth. He never talked about why he came back. Some guessed it was for his daughter Emma. Others figured it was because he couldn't face the noise of the outside world anymore. Either way, the man who once held surgical tools now ran a small-town clinic where he treated everything from bee stings to broken ribs, usually in exchange for pies, firewood, or a promise to pay later. He lived just outside town in a weathered farmhouse at the edge of Pine Hill Road, with his mother-in-law, Helen Parker, and little Emma. Helen was no ordinary grandmother. Before retirement, she'd been a tenured professor of animal behavior at the University of Oregon, a sharp-minded woman whose presence commanded attention in any room. Now she lived in the small guest house behind the Collins home, tending her herb garden, attending town meetings, and, quietly, worrying about the way Emma could sense things no one else could. Emma, though blind since birth, moved through their home like it was etched into her skin. Her fingers traced walls, counted steps. She knew every creaky floorboard, every shift in wind through the window panes. She rarely asked for help, not because she didn't need it, but because she hated being treated as fragile. "I can do it, Daddy," she'd often say with gentle defiance. Most of the town treated Emma kindly enough, though some folks, especially older ones, viewed her blindness with pity or worse, quiet discomfort. But Helen knew there was nothing broken about her granddaughter. In fact, she believed Emma had a gift, a quiet intuition, something instinctive that reached beyond sight. That belief had never mattered more than in recent weeks. Rumors had begun to swirl, whispers of a wild dog seen near the farms, one that had attacked livestock and bitten two men. Several people had spotted the animal near the elementary school playground, just after sunset. Parents grew nervous. Children were warned to stay indoors. Fear crept into corners of the town that once felt safe. They called the dog the Ghost of Pine Hill. No one could catch him. No one dared get close. But Helen suspected something others didn't. This wasn't just any stray. There was a story behind those growls in the dark, and somehow she knew. So did Emma. The first time someone spotted the dog, it was near the old Jensen barn, just a blur of movement at twilight, like smoke slipping through fence posts. No one thought much of it. But then came the torn chicken coops, the half-eaten feed bags, the panicked livestock. By the time Max made his third appearance, fear had begun to root itself in the town's soil. He was large, unmistakably a German shepherd, with a ragged coat and a gait that looked both powerful and broken. His eyes, those deep, haunted amber eyes, were the stuff of nightmares for children and parents alike. Some said he moved like a ghost. Others swore he could vanish into the woods faster than any trap or tranquilizer gun could reach him. And then he bit someone. Two, actually. The first was Mike Finley, a farmhand who cornered the dog behind his tool shed. He claimed he just wanted to scare it off, but Max lunged before he got the chance. The second was a mail carrier whose only mistake was being at the wrong place at the wrong time, leaving a package on a porch too close to the tree line. Both injuries required stitches. Neither victim could say exactly what triggered the attack, only that it was fast, fierce, and terrifying. Soon, whispers turned into headlines in the local newsletter. Dangerous stray on the loose. Officials urge caution after dog attacks. Parents, keep your children indoors after dusk. But Max hadn't always been a stray. Sheriff Logan, a man who rarely showed emotion, lowered his voice when he spoke about it. That dog, he used to wear a badge. Max had once served proudly in the Oregon State K-9 unit. His handler, Officer Jason Hart, was a well-respected figure in law enforcement and a Cedar Falls native. They were inseparable, trained for search and rescue, narcotics detection, and suspect apprehension. A true team. Until one snowy night, during a highway pursuit, Officer Hart was killed in a collision. Max, thrown from the cruiser, was presumed dead too, but he wasn't. 3 months later, Max resurfaced 50 miles away, near a closed-down lumber mill. What happened during those lost weeks remained a mystery, but when animal control finally caught a glimpse of him again, Max was a different creature. His body bore the signs of neglect: open sores, matted fur, old scars layered over fresh ones. He flinched at raised voices and turned violent at the sight of leashes or poles. Dr. Ava Monroe, the local wildlife rehabilitator, reviewed the case files and sighed. This isn't just a lost dog. This is a damaged soul. Still, Cedar Falls didn't speak in terms of trauma. They spoke in terms of threat. And so the dog, once praised for courage, became the target of fear. Max wasn't just unwanted, he was hunted. Emma had no way of knowing any of this that evening in the field. She didn't know about the K-9 badge, or Officer Hart, or the angry headlines. All she knew was the way Max's growl didn't sound angry. It sounded broken, like someone who had been screaming for help so long, they forgot what silence felt like. The Cedar Falls Community Hall hadn't been this full in years. Wooden folding chairs creaked beneath the weight of concerned citizens. Ceiling fans whirred overhead, offering little relief from the late summer heat. A faint smell of old varnish and sweat hung in the air as people murmured anxiously, eyes darting toward the front of the room. Sheriff Logan stood at the podium, his jaw clenched beneath his graying mustache. Behind him, a large poster board had been propped up, displaying blurry photos of the dog everyone had come to fear. "We've got ourselves a situation," he began. "The German Shepherd you've seen around town. Some of you call him the Ghost, others just the Stray. His name is Max, or at least it was. He was once a decorated K-9 officer." The room erupted in murmurs. Someone scoffed. "Used to be doesn't mean a damn thing now." "Let me finish," the sheriff said firmly. "Max has attacked 2 people. He's killed livestock, and this morning he escaped from the animal control van after nearly taking off one of our officers' hands. We have 3 days to bring him in before we're forced to put him down." A woman near the back stood up. "3 days? What if he hurts someone else tomorrow? My son saw him behind the schoolyard last night." "I say we put him down now," another voice added. "We can't risk our kids for some broken dog." The crowd roared in agreement. Fear had united them. Fear of what Max might do, of what he might already be capable of. Daniel Collins sat stiffly in the 3rd row, his daughter Emma beside him, her hand tucked securely into his. He hadn't wanted to bring her, but Helen insisted. "She needs to understand how her town works," Helen had said. "You can't shield her from everything, Daniel." As voices rose around them, Emma gripped her father's fingers tighter. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes vacant as always, but her head tilted slightly listening. When Sheriff Logan finally asked, "Anyone else wish to speak before we vote?" A small hand rose into the air. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "Emma." All eyes turned. The crowd stilled. Sheriff Logan offered a gentle nod. "The chair recognizes Miss Emma Collins." Daniel began to protest, but Helen stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Let her speak." Emma stood, her white cane resting lightly in her grip. She didn't face the crowd directly, but her voice rang out, clear and steady. "Maybe he's not dangerous. Maybe he's just scared." A hush fell over the room. "My grandma's cat scratched people too. He used to hide under the couch and hiss. But it wasn't because he was mean. It was because some boys hurt him before we got him. He didn't trust anyone. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Max isn't a monster, Emma continued. He's hurting. I could feel it when he growled at me. It wasn't anger, it was pain. A few snorts of disbelief echoed from the back. With all due respect, grumbled Mr. Dalton, a cattle farmer. We're not talking about a house cat. We're talking about a 100-pound attack dog. Emma didn't flinch. Have you tried talking to him? She asked. Not shouting, just being kind? Soft laughter trickled from one side of the room, but Dr. Ava Monroe, seated near the front, leaned forward with curiosity. No, she admitted. I don't think anyone has. I think he just forgot how to trust people, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone has to help him remember. Sheriff Logan scratched his jaw. That may be true, Emma, but it's still dangerous. No one wants to see anyone else hurt. Daniel moved to pull her gently back into her seat, but Helen caught his hand again. She's not finished, she whispered. Emma took a breath. I'm not scared of Max. He didn't hurt me. He just needed someone to listen. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dr. Monroe stood. I've rehabilitated animals before, she said. I'd like to try with Max, if we can capture him safely. Logan nodded solemnly. 3 days. If he shows no signs of rehabilitation by Friday at sundown, I'll have no choice but to authorize lethal force. Emma sat back down. Daniel's heart pounded. He looked at his daughter, not just as a child, but as someone who had just shifted the direction of an entire town. And maybe, just maybe, the fate of a broken dog named Max. 3 hours after the town meeting, the sun was beginning to dip behind the tree line, casting long blue shadows across Pine Hill Road. Most of Cedar Falls was settling in for dinner, but not Emma and Helen. The old Buick purred quietly as Helen guided it down a dirt path that hadn't seen regular use in years. Tall grass brushed against the sides of the car. Birds scattered overhead. Somewhere nearby, a creek gurgled over worn stones. You're sure about this? Helen asked, not for the first time. Emma, sitting upright in the passenger seat with her white cane across her lap, nodded slowly. He's there. I can feel him. Helen glanced sideways. Feeling ain't proof, sweetheart. Emma tilted her head. Neither is fear. Helen sighed. At 74, she should have been the voice of reason. She taught animal behavior for decades, rehabilitated dozens of difficult cases, but none quite like this. None with a granddaughter like Emma. If your daddy finds out about this, he won't, Emma interrupted, her voice soft but sure. Helen parked at the end of the trail, near the rusted remnants of the old lumber mill. The structure leaned precariously, windows shattered, vines twisting through gaps in the siding. The place had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades, now just a skeleton of Cedar Falls past. Take this, Helen said, handing Emma a tote bag. Inside were dog treats, a bottle of water, and a small first aid kit, just in case. As they stepped out, Helen's voice dropped into that firm, no-nonsense tone Emma knew well. If I say stop, you stop. If I say come back, you come back. No arguments. Yes, ma'am, Emma said, her cane tapping the overgrown path as they moved carefully toward the mill. The air was still. Even the cicadas had gone quiet. Then Emma stopped. He's here, she whispered. I can hear him breathing. Helen froze. She scanned the shadows near the collapsed porch, and there he was, a silhouette barely distinguishable from the dark. Max. His amber eyes glowed faintly from beneath the overhang. His body was tense, head low, legs rigid. A low growl built in his throat. Stay behind me, Helen murmured, stepping slightly in front of Emma. But Emma stepped around her. Hello, Max, she said gently, like greeting an old friend. My name's Emma. The growl deepened. Max's ears pinned back. He bared his teeth. Not a threat, more like a warning. "Emma, stop right there!" Helen warned, her voice tight. Emma obeyed but didn't back away. Instead, she slowly knelt, setting her cane down beside her. Her hand rested palm up on her lap. "I know what it's like," she began, voice even, calm. "To feel like people don't see you, to be called names, to be left out." Max didn't move. Emma reached back without turning. Helen, surprised but acting quickly, placed a few dog treats in her open hand. "I brought these for you," she said softly, "if you're hungry. That's okay, right?" Silence. Then Max took a single step forward. Helen's breath caught. Another step, then another. Emma remained still, hand extended. Max paused just inches from her, nostrils flaring. Slowly, tentatively, he reached forward and took a treat from her palm. He didn't bite. He didn't snarl. He just backed away, turned in a circle, and began to eat. Emma's face lit up. "See, Grandma," she whispered. "He's not bad. He's just scared." And in that moment, in the ruins of a forgotten mill, an invisible thread of trust was spun between a wounded dog and a little girl who couldn't see, but somehow saw more clearly than anyone else. Daniel Collins was furious. He stood on the front porch, arms crossed tightly across his chest as Helen helped Emma out of the car. The porch light cast long shadows across the gravel driveway. Max wasn't with them, but the tension was thick as smoke. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice low, sharp. Emma hesitated. Helen answered for them. "We found Max." Daniel's expression twisted. "You what?" "He's hiding out by the old mill," Helen continued, calm but firm. "He's in rough shape, worse than I imagined, but he took food from Emma's hand. No signs of aggression, not toward her." Daniel turned to his daughter. "You promised me you wouldn't go near him." "He needed someone," Emma said simply, "and I didn't get hurt." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Helen interrupted. "That she should be scared of the world forever? That we should turn away from something that's hurting just because it's easier?" The silence that followed was heavy. Later that night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. He wasn't just a father, he was a doctor. He believed in science, in protocol, in control. But none of that explained how a blind 7-year-old had managed to connect with a traumatized animal that professionals had failed to approach. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, the weight of the decision had shifted. He called Dr. Ava Monroe. 3 hours later, Ava stood in the Collins kitchen with a worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder, her hazel eyes filled with cautious curiosity. "You're serious?" she asked Daniel. He nodded. "I can't explain it, but my daughter, Max responds to her." Ava turned to Helen. "Can you take me there?" Helen nodded. "We've been once, but we'll need to move slow." By early afternoon, the trio, Ava, Helen, and Emma, stood once again at the edge of the mill clearing. Max was waiting, not close but not hidden either. He watched them from beneath a sagging window frame, ears high, body still. This time Ava came prepared. She crouched, keeping her movements small, and recorded his posture and responses on a handheld recorder. "He's underweight," she observed softly, favoring his back leg. "Coat is matted, and those scars on his muzzle—" She trailed off. "Barbed wire, maybe, or restraints." She didn't need to say the rest out loud. This dog had been through hell. Emma knelt, her voice once again a steady rhythm. "Hi, Max. We came back like I promised." Max inched forward, nose twitching. Emma held out a squeaky rubber ball from her pocket. "Want to try something new?" She squeaked it once. Max flinched but didn't run. She rolled it gently toward him. Max sniffed it, nudged it, then picked it up. Ava's breath caught. "That's a trained response," she whispered. "He's remembering." From that moment on, the visits became routine. Every morning and evening, Emma and Helen returned with food, clean water, and gentle voices. Ava recorded everything. how Max responded to commands like sit, stay, and leave it. How he flinched at the sight of leashes but accepted Emma's hand without hesitation. By day 3, Max came when Emma called his name. By day 4, he allowed Helen to sit within arm's reach. By day 5, he brought the ball back, not just once, but over and over again, placing it gently into Emma's palm. Ava was stunned. "I've worked with dozens of trauma cases," she said, jotting down notes one evening, "but I've never seen an animal this damaged respond so quickly." Helen offered a quiet answer. "That's because he wasn't responding to treatment. He was responding to trust." And Emma? She just smiled. "He remembers how to be good. He just needed someone to remind him." It wasn't a miracle. Not yet. Max still flinched at sudden sounds, still growled if Ava moved too fast. But he no longer looked like a wild thing. He looked like a dog remembering how to be loved. One evening, as they were preparing to leave, Ava crouched beside Max, who now sat calmly near Emma's side. She reached out gently and wiped some dirt from the metal tag still clinging to his collar. Her eyes widened as she read the engraving. "Daniel," she said later that night back at the farmhouse, "I ran the number on Max's badge tag. And he belonged to Officer Jason Hart, Oregon State Patrol, K9 unit, confirmed match." Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. Jason Hart had been more than a name in a file. He had been Daniel's brother-in-law, and the person who inherited Max after Jason's death? Daniel's estranged younger brother, Brian Collins. Daniel stared at the collar in Ava's hand, the tag now clean enough to reveal its engraving. K9 unit, Officer Jason Hart, Dakud 9743. He ran a hand down his face and sat heavily in the chair across the table. His coffee had gone cold. Again. "Jason was my brother-in-law," he said quietly. "My wife's brother. He and we weren't always close, but we respected each other." Ava leaned forward. "After Jason died, Max disappeared. The department assumed he was killed in the accident." Helen, who had been standing silently in the doorway, crossed her arms. "But someone found him. Someone brought him back. And abused him," Ava added. "The scarring, the behavioral regression. It wasn't just neglect. It was systematic." Daniel's voice tightened. "Jason had no children, no spouse. So Max would have gone to next of kin." He paused. "That would have been Brian," Helen finished for him. "Your brother." The name didn't land. It crashed, loud and heavy, like thunder in a room too small to hold it. Brian Collins had always been the other son, the one who couldn't hold down a job, who borrowed money and disappeared, who showed up for holidays late, if at all. He hadn't been in Cedar Falls in almost 6 years, not since Sarah's funeral. "I haven't heard from him since the day we buried my wife," Daniel said bitterly. "He came late, left early, didn't even ask to hold Emma." Helen's eyes narrowed. "And he never once mentioned Max?" "Not a word." Ava stood and walked slowly to the window, watching the wind ripple across the tall grass outside. "We need to tell Sheriff Logan. If Brian inherited Max legally, but then mistreated him, that's a criminal offense." Daniel's face hardened. "If? There's no if. Look at him. Look at what that dog's been through." Helen exhaled slowly. "Do you think Brian would have done it out of spite?" "No," Daniel said, then corrected himself. "Not just spite. Brian was always bitter, jealous of anyone who had more than him. Jason was a local hero. His death made headlines. Maybe Brian thought Max was some kind of trophy." "Or a payday," Ava added grimly. "A trained K9 with a proven record? On the black market, that kind of dog could fetch thousands, especially to the wrong kind of buyer." Daniel looked at her sharply. "You think he was planning to sell him?" "I think he might have tried, but Max ran before it happened. Maybe he got away. Maybe he was dumped. Either way, someone did this to him, and all signs point back to Brian." The room fell into silence. Emma entered quietly, her bare feet making no sound on the floorboards. Max followed closely behind, tail low but relaxed, ears perked at every noise. "Is something wrong?" she asked, sensing the heaviness in the room. Daniel stood, went to her, and knelt. "Sweetheart, we just found out something important about Max. He used to belong to Uncle Jason." Emma smiled faintly. "I knew he was someone special." "He is," Daniel agreed. "And we also think Uncle Brian may have taken care of him after Jason passed." Emma's expression changed, her hands tightening around Max's collar. "He didn't take care of him," she said softly. "He hurt him." Max shifted closer to her, pressing his head into her side. "I don't know how I know," she continued, "but I do. Max doesn't like his voice. I heard it once, in a memory almost." It made Max tremble. Helen exchanged a glance with Daniel, her voice low and steady. "Children like her, they pick up on things we don't. Connections, instincts, trust it." Daniel stood and looked at Max, really looked at him. The healing wounds, the hesitancy, the way he followed Emma like a shadow that had finally found its light. "If Brian really did this," Daniel said slowly, "he doesn't deserve to own a paperclip, let alone this dog." Ava's voice cut through the quiet. "Then let's make sure he never gets the chance again." The church bell in the center of Cedar Falls rang out 7 times. By the time the last chime faded into the summer sky, the town square was already packed. Foldable lawn chairs lined the edges, and people stood in small clusters, murmuring with suspicion and curiosity. At the far end, a makeshift stage had been assembled beneath the shade of the old sycamore tree. It wasn't a festival. It wasn't a fundraiser. It was something far more unusual, a dog demonstration. Specifically, a demonstration to determine whether Max, once known to the community as the Ghost of Pine Hill, deserved to live. Sheriff Logan stood at the center with his arms crossed, flanked by 2 deputies and a clipboard. Daniel Collins stood to one side of the platform, his face unreadable. Dr. Ava Monroe and Helen watched from the front row, and next to Daniel stood Emma, small, steady, blind, but unshaken. Max sat at her heel, leashed but alert. No muzzle, no cage, just trust. "You're sure about this?" Daniel whispered to his daughter. Emma nodded. "He's ready." The murmurs grew louder as the 2 stepped forward. Max didn't growl. He didn't pull. He simply followed Emma's pace with quiet obedience. Sheriff Logan raised his hand. "All right, folks. We're not here to debate anymore. We're here to witness. Dr. Monroe and I have agreed to observe Max's behavior. Based on what we see tonight, we'll decide whether he can be safely released to the Collins family or if we have to escalate action." Someone from the crowd shouted, "What if he snaps again? You willing to risk a kid's life over a dog?" Emma turned her head toward the voice. "He didn't snap. He was scared, just like you are now." A hush fell. Even Sheriff Logan looked taken aback. Emma knelt and removed Max's leash. A collective gasp rippled through the square. "He won't run," she said confidently. "Watch." She stood up straight, then gave a command, clear and gentle. "Max, sit." Max sat. Ava began taking notes. "Max, lie down." He lowered himself without hesitation. "Max, stay." Emma walked 3 steps away, then stopped. "Now come." Max trotted over, tail wagging once, gently nudging her hand with his nose. The silence from the crowd was almost reverent. Then Emma did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. She held it up. "Max, take it." He gently bit the cloth, held it, then dropped it when she said, "Release." People began to shift forward, watching closely. Emma turned to the crowd. "You were afraid because of what you heard, but I know him because of what I felt. Max isn't just a dog. He's someone who remembers how to be good." Helen wiped her eyes. Ava smiled softly. Then Sheriff Logan stepped forward. "Emma, you've made your case, and I've never seen this town so quiet." He turned to the people gathered. "I'll say this. If this is the same animal we spent months trying to catch, he's not the same anymore. And maybe that's not because he changed, but because someone finally saw him." He paused, looked at Daniel and Emma. "I'm recommending a temporary custody order. Max will stay with the Collins family under official observation. If he continues to show no signs of aggression, we'll clear him permanently." Some murmurs of hesitation stirred in the crowd, but not outrage. Just uncertainty melting into cautious acceptance. Emma knelt and whispered into Max's ear, "You did it! They saw you!" Max licked her cheek once, then sat quietly beside her as the crowd slowly began to applaud. Not wildly, not loudly, but genuinely. The first crack in fear had opened, and something warmer was beginning to shine through. For a few days, it felt like things might actually be okay. Max slept curled at the foot of Emma's bed, breathing steady, finally safe. He followed her through the garden, nudged her when she forgot her cane, waited patiently beside her during breakfast. He had even started wagging his tail again, hesitant at first, then freer, as though permission to feel joy had finally been granted. But peace in Cedar Falls had a short shelf life. It started with a phone call. Daniel was reviewing patient notes at the clinic when Sheriff Logan's voice came over the line. "We got a problem." Daniel sat up straighter. "What kind of problem?" "Brian Collins was spotted about 20 miles north. Rest stop off Route 7. Someone caught his plate. It's a rental. Out of state. He asked for directions to your farm." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. Logan continued, "We're issuing a formal order of protection. I'm sending a deputy to stay near the property. Lock your doors." Daniel hung up and raced home. That night, the house was quiet but tense. Emma could sense it. She sat beside Max, her hand resting on his fur. He was trembling again. Not from cold, but something else. Something older. "Does he remember him?" she asked softly. Daniel knelt beside them. "I think so." Emma's brow furrowed. "He's scared in a different way. Not like before. It's deeper." Around midnight, Helen heard something outside. Branches cracking. She peeked through the curtain and saw headlights parked at the edge of the property. Not moving, not coming closer. Just waiting. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and a bat. Helen picked up the cordless phone with Sheriff Logan on speed dial, but it was Max who reacted first. He stood stiff-legged, tail low, eyes locked on the door like a soldier bracing for war. A deep growl rumbled from his chest, not uncertain like before. This one was protective. Emma placed her hand on his back. "It's him, isn't it?" Daniel nodded. "It's Brian." Suddenly, the front porch creaked. Someone was walking up the steps. Then came the knock. Calm, measured. 2 soft taps. Daniel opened the door just a crack. "Get off my property." Brian stood there, eyes bloodshot, a smile too smooth to be sincere. "I'm just here for what's mine." "You lost that right the day you hurt him." Brian leaned slightly, trying to peer past the door. "You think some damaged dog means more to you than your own brother?" "He's family," Daniel said. "You're not." Max barked then, loud and sharp, the kind of bark that made skin crawl. He lunged forward, only stopped by Emma's hand on his shoulder. Brian's expression twisted. "You really think this ends here? You think they'll let you keep him forever? One mistake, one slip, and he's back in the system. Or worse." "We're not afraid of you," Emma said from behind the door. Brian laughed once. "That's the problem, sweetheart. You should be." Daniel slammed the door. Sheriff Logan arrived 10 minutes later, but Brian was already gone. Tire tracks led back to the highway, nothing else. The next morning, they found a dead rabbit hanging on the gate. A silent message. Sheriff Logan increased patrols. A formal report was filed, but Brian had vanished again, leaving only fear behind. Later that evening, Emma sat on the porch with Max's head in her lap. Her voice was quiet. He wants to scare you. He wants to make you think you're still his. Max didn't move. But you're not. You're ours now, and you don't have to be afraid anymore. Max shifted, resting his full weight against her. That night, he didn't tremble in his sleep. It happened on a Tuesday morning, quiet, still, and deceptively ordinary. Emma was helping Helen prepare tea in the kitchen, carefully lining up 2 mugs while Max lay sprawled beneath the table. The morning sun filtered through lace curtains, casting soft light on the wooden floor. The whole house felt safe until Max stood up, suddenly, abruptly. Every muscle in his body tensed. His ears shot forward. He sniffed the air once, twice, then let out a sharp bark that startled both Emma and Helen. Emma turned toward him. "What is it?" Max let out another bark, then bolted straight toward Helen. At first, Helen raised a hand as if to calm him. "Max, what?" But then her knees buckled. The mug in her hand slipped and shattered against the tile. Emma screamed, "Grandma!" Max barked again, then positioned himself against Helen's side as she collapsed into the chair behind her. Her breathing grew shallow and one hand clutched her chest. Daniel arrived within seconds, alerted by the noise. One look at Helen, and his instincts kicked in. "Cardiac arrhythmia," he muttered, grabbing his stethoscope and emergency kit. "Ava, call 911. But even before he confirmed it, Max had known. He'd sensed it before the symptoms showed. The doctors at the hospital called it an exceptional early warning. Daniel called it something else, a miracle. Helen had suffered a near-silent arrhythmia. No chest pain, no dramatic symptoms. If Max hadn't reacted when he did, it might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Instead, she was treated within the golden hour. And when the cardiologist asked how they knew to bring her in so fast, Daniel told the truth. "The dog told us." Word traveled quickly through Cedar Falls. It wasn't long before the local paper ran a new headline: "The ghost who saved a life." And suddenly, the dog that had once been feared, chased, hunted, blamed, was being greeted in the streets with cautious admiration. Kids waved at Max from school buses. Farmers who once called for his death left out bowls of water by their gates. People asked Emma about him at the diner. Even the local vet offered to provide care at no cost. But most importantly, something shifted in Max himself. He walked taller now, more assured. He no longer flinched when doors slammed or when strangers reached out to touch his fur. He stayed close to Emma, always, but the trembling was gone. His eyes, once dim with fear, now held light. Still, there was one last step to make things permanent. 2 weeks later, Daniel and Emma stood before the county judge in a quiet courtroom. Sheriff Logan was there, and so was Dr. Ava Monroe. Even Helen, though still recovering, had insisted on attending, wrapped in a shawl and stubborn as ever. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked over the final documents. "Mr. Collins, you are requesting full legal custody of the canine formerly registered as K9 Max, formerly property of the late officer Jason Hart. Is that correct?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you are prepared to take on full responsibility for his care, training, and any liability?" "I am." The judge looked over at Max, who was sitting obediently at Emma's feet. "I've reviewed the letters of recommendation from Sheriff Logan, Dr. Monroe, and the local vet. I've also reviewed the behavioral assessments." He smiled faintly. "I must say, I've never seen a town rally behind a dog quite like this." He signed the order. "As of today, Max is officially a permanent member of the Collins family." Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, students, reporters, and more than a few teary-eyed townsfolk. Emma held Max's leash as they stepped out into the afternoon light. One reporter bent down to her level. "Emma, what do you want people to know about Max?" Emma smiled and said simply, He didn't need to be rescued. He just needed to be believed in. And for the first time in a long while, the town believed in something good again. The air in Cedar Falls was different now. Not louder, not busier, just lighter. On quiet mornings, you could still find Emma walking the dirt path behind the Collins farmhouse, Max trotting just ahead, stopping every few steps to wait for her. She no longer needed her cane when he was by her side. He was her guide, her protector, her shadow made flesh. But more than anything, he was her friend. Inside the farmhouse, framed photographs lined the mantel, some old, some new. One in particular stood at the center, Emma hugging Max, his head tilted into her shoulder, her smile wide and free. Beneath the photo was a handwritten label in a child's scrawl, family. Daniel often sat in the living room late at night, the lights dim, a mug of tea going cold in his hands. He listened to the soft rhythm of Max's paws pacing the hallway, the occasional thump of his tail when Emma whispered something to him in her sleep. It was a quiet reminder that sometimes the things we fear the most are the ones that come to save us. Helen, still recovering but as sharp as ever, often called Max her four-legged alarm system and swore he had a better bedside manner than half the nurses at the hospital. Dr. Ava Monroe continued to visit weekly, not as a professional but as a friend. She said working with Max had reminded her why she fell in love with animals in the first place. Even Sheriff Logan, gruff and stoic as ever, would occasionally stop by with treats and mutter, "Don't tell anyone I like this dog." The town, once divided by fear, had become a place of cautious hope. Max had become more than a dog. He was a symbol of redemption, of patience, of the power of being seen. And Emma? She had grown in ways no one could measure with a ruler. She had always lived in a world without sight, but now she lived in a world full of understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in strokes of honey and rose, Emma sat on the porch with Max curled beside her. "Do you remember," she whispered, "when they were all afraid of you?" Max shifted, his eyes fluttering open. "I wasn't," she smiled. "Not even for a second." He nudged her hand with his nose. "You were never broken," she added, "just waiting for someone to see the whole you." And she had, from the very beginning. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from medicine. Sometimes it comes from a child's voice, a steady hand, a second chance, and a love so unconditional it rewrites everything you thought you knew about fear, forgiveness, and the quiet, steady magic of being truly seen.